This episode of the Trek Geeks podcast is brought to you by Discovering Trek, a Star Trek Discovery companion. Break down each week's brand new episode of the 6th live-action Star Trek series with us every Monday during the season. To subscribe on your iPhone, Android, or other device, visit our website at discoveringtrek.com.
Hi, this is Michelle Specht. I play Dr. Elise McKenna on Star Trek Continues. Oh my God, I'm totally fangirling right now because I just met Dan Davidson and Bill Smith of the Trek Geeks podcast. Oh my gosh, they are amazing.
The biggest little show this side of the Alpha Quadrant, your independent Star Trek podcast. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Trek Geeks. I'm your co-host, Bill Smith, and this week I've actually introduced myself, so I'm already ahead of the game. We're so excited you joined us. Thank you for downloading and listening. We're always happy to be a part of your week, and hopefully we have some great discussion for you today. I say hopefully because I'm about to introduce my co-host, and we all know that can go sideways at any given moment. If he were put on trial for the crimes of humanity, let's just say we'd all be put in jail, galactic Q jail for the rest of our lives. He is the very guilty Dan Davidson. Dan, thanks for ruining it for the rest of us, buddy.
Shut off that damn noise.
I would love to turn off your microphone. Yeah.
Thanks for that wonderful introduction, Bill. As always, every week you raise the bar, man. It's a little better every week. One of these days, I might even laugh at it. But thanks.
That would presume you have a sense of humor, and we know you don't.
Oh, this is going to be a fun day, isn't it?
It really is. And as you've alluded to, Dan, we're going to talk about, as a continuation of our TNG 30 celebration, we're going to talk about the episode that started it all for Next Gen.
Yes, indeed. It's we're wrapping up the 30th anniversary here in 2017, so why not go back to the very beginning with Encounter at Farpoint. Rewatched it this week, and it's time to talk about that first one that we had since the late 60s. Wow. It's really amazing to think of when you think about it.
Yeah, at times, I have to remind myself that the gap was really less than 20 years as far as television series. And even less when you talk about the last feature film, which I'm sure we'll get into later on. But it definitely kicked off a brand new era for Star Trek, one that we're still kind of enjoying the fruits of today, I think.
I think so, too. It's funny that you say it was less than 20 years. When you're young back then, as we were, it sure seemed like it was a lot longer, didn't it?
Absolutely it did. Sorry, I was taking a sip of coffee because I thought you were going to talk for longer.
No, I'd rather hear your voice than mine, so as little as
don't I know it? Don't I know it? Dan, speaking of hearing voices, we'd love to hear the voice of the people who listen to this podcast. How might they give us their comments, suggestions, episode recommendations, or other communiques?
I would be happy to go through that list, Mr. Segway King. On Twitter, Facebook, Skype, and Instagram, you can find us at Trek Geeks, or you can send us an email at podcast@trekgeeks.com. If you'd like to leave us a voicemail, you can do so by calling 508-784-1701. You can also do the same thing by going to speakpipe.com/TrekGeeks. And hey, we'd love it if you join our official Facebook group, Camp Kittimer. There's always great things happening over there. There's Star Trek talk, Star Trek picks, contests, polls, you name it, it's going on over there. And to join the group, all you need to do is go to facebook.com/groups/Camp Kittimer. And Heather, Jackie, or Dan will let you right in to join in on all the fun at Camp Kittimer. But you must remember that any messages or comments that you leave in any of these places may be used in a future episode, and I'm going to send it back to Bill.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that big time, muchacho. Muchacho, where did I pull that from?
That was awesome.
Thank you. I'm sure Drosen loved that one. We're going to have to use that more. Oh, Dan.
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you know this, but I have it on good authority.
Mm-hmm.
And it's time for the news from TrekNews.net. Spanning the Alpha Quadrant. For all the news on all the Star Treks, it's TrekNews.net. Online at TrekNews.net. And Dan, up first. You know, buddy, this is something we've known was coming for a while, and we've not wanted to necessarily, acknowledge the fact that it was coming for a while. But Dan, the final episode of Star Trek Continues, as this episode drops, premiered online yesterday.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. To Boldly Go Part 2 is going to wrap up that critically acclaimed fan series that we love so much. The 11th episode did drop yesterday, and I have a feeling we'll be talking about it soon, but we want everyone to go out and watch it as well and see how this 5-year mission actually wraps up. It's available on YouTube, Vimeo, or head right on over to StarTrekContinues.com and check it out. I absolutely am positive that you will not be disappointed in what we're going to see here in this final episode. Bill?
All we can say is prepare yourselves. Watch it uninterrupted if at all humanly possible. If you can, watch part 1 and then go straight into part 2. But we think that you'll agree that it's a fitting conclusion to this series, and they really just, they didn't only raise the bar, they took the bar and put it in a place where nobody else is going to touch it. Fair enough?
I guess you could say the bar has boldly gone where it's never gone before. Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great way to put it.
It's no secret how much we love everybody at Star Trek Continues, and it's so amazing to watch what they have done. But at the same time, I'm a little heartbroken that this is the last one, and I'm dead serious when I say that. They wrapped it up. They did it the way they wanted to do it, and it's fantastic. But at the same time, it kind of sucks.
It does. I mean, we absolutely admit to having a bias for the series. Partly because, we have so many friends that have worked on it. But before that, because it was just so good. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you put out superior content, you get superior results. And the result for me was, absolute fandom. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Gonna miss them.
Yeah. No, nice. So, Dan, up next, it appears that the documentary Remembering Leonard Nimoy, the one by Leonard's daughter, Julie Nimoy, and David Knight, is set to air throughout the month of November.
Yeah, this is pretty great. PBS affiliate stations in New York, Boston, L.A., Philadelphia, Chicago, Indianapolis, Salt Lake City, San Antonio, Denver, Cincinnati, and more. It's pretty much all across the country are going to be showing this film. Of course, as you may or may not know, it looks into Leonard's extraordinary life on and off screen, along with his battle with COPD. It premiered earlier this year in Boston on a local PBS affiliate, which, of course, Boston was Leonard Nimoy's birthplace. And it performed so well that it garnered a national push. So we are going to finally have that. And it's something that you should definitely check out. Any fan of Leonard Nimoy, I think, will be very touched by what they're going to see in this documentary.
I've not seen it yet. I imagine I will at some point after it is aired on PBS. I do know plenty of people who have and have had nothing but wonderful things to say about the film.
Absolutely. And of course, there was a lot of cities that I mentioned there. Head on over to treknews.net and you can get that complete list of air dates and areas where it's going to be playing. And I had a chance to talk to Julie Nimoy at STLV this past summer. And I am really looking forward to sitting down and watching this. Some of the things I've read online about it are sad and joyous, and it's going to be an emotional roller coaster, I'm sure.
Without a doubt. And Dan, lastly in news, the fall finale of Star Trek Discovery aired this past Sunday. And of course, we're not going to talk about any spoilers, But the thing we will tell people is that CBS has already announced the winter premiere.
Yes, good news, kind of. Yeah, well, of course, it's good news, but we'll get into the kind of in a second. The series is going to return on January 7th, a little earlier than I thought it was going to be, but I'm very happy about that. So January 7th, 2018 at 8:30, the show will return, Eastern time, I should say. The show will return for 6 more episodes to round out the first season with a finale that is scheduled for February 11th. And the first episode is going to be called Despite Yourself. So it's actually episode 10, but it will be the first episode starting on January 7th. Very exciting stuff, wouldn't you say, partner?
Without a doubt. I am very excited that it's returning. My concern, however, is that the penultimate episode of the season is going to air, Dan, on Super Bowl Sunday. And this strikes me as not the best planning by CBS.
Yeah, I have to admit that I was not thrilled to see that. Of course, you and I being where we are, it's going to pose a huge conflict for people in New England who are New England fans and whomever else plays in the Super Bowl this year. So hopefully those two markets will be able to figure out a way to be able to have their cake and eat it too while they're hosting the Lombardi Trophy by TB12, right?
I am right there with you. I can tell you that, if that's the choice, if that's the choice we have to make, I'm probably going to miss the third quarter so that I can watch Star Trek Discovery. It's just that simple.
Yeah, the way that I look at it, I was actually talking with my family about this over the weekend because, we're all huge Star Trek fans. And of course, we love watching our team in the Super Bowl. And if that is the case again this year, the good thing about Discovery is that it's streaming. So if we need to watch it after the game, that's a possibility, but I'm being pulled in both directions right now. I'm not sure which way I'm going to go yet.
Well, the one thing I can tell you is that it's not going to be Tim Robertson's Steelers in the Super Bowl, so he won't have to worry about a thing.
Careful, Bob Myers might be listening too,
That's true. That's true. Yeah, so we'll see what happens. I'm very excited that Discovery's back January 7th. Very much looking forward to the finale on February 11th. I have a feeling it's going to be amazing and incredible. I can only hope that that there's a lot that happens that's exciting and makes us really, really crave season 2.
I was just going to say, and the thing that's going to be great after this last episode on February 11th is that we get to look forward to yet another season of Star Trek Discovery coming. We're thinking probably in early 2019, but still, we're going to be in anticipation of yet another season of Star Trek, and that's never a bad thing.
So at the tail end of the last segment, you talked about the anticipation of Star Trek. And that is perhaps a perfect segue in the discussion we're about to have now regarding the premiere episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Encounter at Farpoint. Dan, there was a time when the only Star Trek we were anticipating was the next movie.
Right.
And I think that by the time a new series was announced, our minds were kind of blown a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. I've said recently that, you said it also, that it had been 20-ish years since there was live action Star Trek on television. And back then, it seemed like it had been a lot longer because all we had were the reruns of the original series on our local Boston affiliate that we would watch over and over and over again. So the idea of something new with Star Trek was really mind-blowing. It was exciting, and it was like, oh my God, I'm not going to have to drive to the local cinema to see another Star Trek adventure. So it was pretty cool.
Well, let's take a look at where fandom was in this time, especially like the years 1986 and 1987, right? So you figure we had just come off of the most successful Star Trek film of all time at that point, which was Star Trek IV, The Voyage Home, the one with the whales.
George and Gracie.
George and Gracie. That's the subtitle I think it should have. Star Trek IV, the one with the whales. And the movies were incredibly successful at this point. We just had this sort of, mini trilogy inside the franchise of Star Treks 2, 3, and 4, all of which, were received incredibly well by fans and moviegoers alike. And then Paramount kind of wanted to strike while the franchise was hot, right? I mean, I know I'm taking a big long story and encapsulating it into a few seconds, but what it boils down to is Paramount decided they wanted a series, and they decided to make it happen. Initially, they were going to try to launch a network and said, let's do syndication. So they went for syndication, and Next Gen really became sort of the forerunner of first-run syndicated drama, which I think is fascinating.
I think that one of the things that has always interested me about how this actually took off is, if you remember, back in the 70s, I think it was, they were planning on creating a new Star Trek show. Was it Star Trek? What was the name of it going to be? Star Trek 2?
Phase 2.
Seriously, wasn't that what it was going to be called?
Star Trek Phase 2.
Phase 2, right. And that kind of failed. So I think there was a lot of skepticism that this was actually going to make it and be done. So as it got closer and closer to becoming reality, I think people on both sides of the positive negative got more amped up about this was going to really happen.
Well, but there was also that aspect of fandom, and I have admitted many times on this here podcast that I was one of these people that essentially said, if it doesn't have Kirk and Spock, it doesn't have me.
Right.
And it's kind of not unlike what we're hearing with Discovery these days, as we talked about in our last episode. Sort of those people who are being negative for the sake of being negative. And admittedly, I was one of those people. So, I were you one of those people at that particular time, or were you more cautiously optimistic, or were you all in?
No, I was all in, and that's why I say on both sides of the equation, you had the people that say, if it doesn't have Kirk and Spock, I want nothing to do with it. And at the time, we didn't have the social media that we do now, so it didn't seem to be as vocal as we're seeing these days. But there were a lot of things going on, the people that weren't excited about it. We saw articles in newspapers and in magazines about that. I was very excited. I knew that this was going to be new Star Trek, and I was excited about it because it's when I was really, really deep into watching TOS all the time. I can remember it was the time that VHS versions of the original series were coming out, and just starting college, not really having a lot of cash to purchase these VHS tapes that I think were like $20 a pop just for one episode. So just to give you an idea of what it was like back then, I only had like 6 or 7 episodes on tape. So I watched them over and over and over again. So the idea of new Trek coming in was very, very exciting for me.
Yes, the CBS Video Library Collection, where you could get 2 episodes on a tape for like $30.
Oh yeah, this was a different version. This was only 1 episode per VHS that I had, so it was even more on my shelf, so to speak.
Oh wow,
yeah,
wow. It's a shame people have never paid for Star Trek before. So let's talk about watching Farpoint for the very first time. I mean, I know we've talked in the past about how you didn't necessarily see it right away. When you did see it, what were your thoughts? I mean, how did you react?
Oh, I did see the first episode the first night it aired.
Okay, my mistake.
And I was in Colorado at the time, as a matter of fact. I attended Colorado State University for a little while, and when it first aired, I was there and watched it with a few friends.
And what did you think about the episode overall? I mean, were you excited by it? Did you enjoy it?
At the time, I was very excited. I do believe I enjoyed it very much, but at the same time, I was really confused about a lot of things going on. It's one of the first times I had gotten involved in watching a show, especially a brand new show, and it was Star Trek to add onto it with all these new people, not realizing who these people are. New ship. I distinctly remember the scene with Admiral McCoy. I was like freaking out because it was one of the people that I knew, and I just thought that was amazing. But I do remember being excited and enjoying it, but as I said, being confused about what was going on. This is new. Who's this Q guy? All that kind of stuff. Yeah.
So I watched it the evening of my 18th birthday. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do this. This is my birthday present to myself. And in the middle of the episode premiering on WCVB TV Channel 5 in Boston, the ABC affiliate, ABC News cut to a special report right in the middle.
Oh, yes, that's right.
So I had to try to figure out when it was on again, and it was on again at like 3 a.m. on Sunday morning. And so I set my VCR and I had to watch it that way. So I got up the next morning and watched it. And then
What was the report?
I don't remember. But it was something like national news type deal. Back in the days where they, would interrupt network programming for whatever. But I remember watching it and I was incredibly disappointed. I was let down. I was like, this is what we're going to watch. This is Star Trek. And I got to tell you, at first glance, I hated the Enterprise D. I mean,
let me ask you this.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because as you're saying that, things are popping into my head. I was excited for Trek, so I remember at the time enjoying it. Now, we're going to get to our thoughts on the episode later, but as you have admitted that you were one of the, if it's not Kirk and Spock, it's not for me group, do you think that your analysis of the episode the first time you saw it kind of already had a not negative tone towards it, but I don't know if I'm going to like this type of thing. So that helped in you being disappointed with that first episode.
Oh, sure. I think that's absolutely possible. But, I think the other half of it is that I hadn't considered that Star Trek, like everything else, evolves, right? I mean, this is a federation that is, for all intents and purposes, 100 years, I'm rounding before we get emails, after Kirk and Spock in the days of the original series. So, Starfleet would evolve. The way humanity approaches problems has evolved. It's not the captain beams down to the planet every week and gets the girl in season 3.
Mm-hmm.
It was I think a more well thought out Star Trek than some of the original series episodes. I thought it had conscience, whereas before they were trying to make a TV series. For me, the distinction I draw is with this: they were trying to make Star Trek. And,
I agree. I think they were trying to make something that was going to, like you said, evolve and build over a long period of time.
Yeah, so I was not excited. I definitely didn't like the Enterprise D. I do like the Enterprise D now. And maybe that's because I've grown to love Next Generation and admit that I was completely wrong about it not being Star Trek if it doesn't have Kirk and Spock.
Sure.
So I'm comfortable with my turnabout. I admit, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa. I was wrong, but Farpoint.
Let me preface what we're going to get into in our conversation today with this.
Yeah,
I watched it again last night with my beautiful bride, Susan, and I'm going to reference a lot of things that she said during our conversation. But one of the things that she said, which I want to bring out right out front because I thought it was hilarious, is when it was done, she was standing in front of the fireplace at our house, and she looked at me with this look on her face, and she goes, "If I had watched this when Next Generation first came out, I never would have watched Star Trek again."
Yeah. Right? So the only way I continued watching Next Gen was because I used to watch it with a group of people I had known since high school. Because remember, I had just barely turned 18. I had graduated, that summer before it aired. And, we would get together and essentially we were our own support group.
Right.
And we started calling the show Wesley Trek as recently as episode 2. Because that's the Naked Now, if memory serves.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it was like, seriously? Really? And then as the first season went on, we convened less and less, and I was watching it on my own, and I was starting to get the Star Trek vibe. But, especially Farpoint, if I had, left my decision on whether or not I was going to continue watching this series on that episode, I would never have watched Star Trek again.
See, for me, when it aired, I was excited. I remember, like I said, I was at CSU. My friend Nicole had a TV in her dorm, so a bunch of us were in her dorm, and I was sitting on the floor in front of the TV. And I don't think I even talked to anybody around me for the whole time the show was on because I was so excited and in it. But yeah, wow, yeah, we're gonna get into some of the wow, yeah moments, I think, shortly.
So let's talk about where the franchise was at this point. We mentioned it a little bit with some of the most successful Star Trek movies of all time. But in the movies, the stories were more action based.
Yes.
They were more, we need to fit this into 2 hours and really grab an audience. So you had more things like, I don't know, phasers firing and ships blowing up and along those lines. And this kind of marked Star Trek's return to television. And was it a return to the original, thoughts regarding Trek, or was it charting a new course, or was it a mixture of both? And I think that was the question that a lot of us had at the time. So, Dan, what about Farpoint said, this is classic Trek to me?
I think that to answer your question, I think it was charting a new course, but it was also a return to Trek. So like you said, it's a mixture of both. And the whole humanity on trial, and how humanity has evolved to its one of peace and IDIC, which we talk about a lot over at Discovering Trek. I think that was the real core of the Trek aspect of Encounter at Farpoint. But at the same time, they were definitely charting a new course with this new technology, this new crew, these new people, and new ideas. I personally think that it was a very 50-50 mix of classic return to Trek and charting that new course.
I can agree with that. You figure that right off the bat, Gene went back to a classic Star Trek trope, which was the godlike being.
Mm-hmm.
How many times do we see that in the original series? Kirk and company come up against this being that has godlike powers, and they have to figure out a way to defeat it. And in this episode, they don't really defeat Q, but they placate him. And that was definitely a difference for this series.
Mm-hmm.
At the time we watched this, we weren't sure if we were going to see Q again or not, because, recurring characters didn't happen a whole lot in TOS.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that it gave us something to chew on with regard to that. Yes, humanity's on trial, but it's the kind of thing where we're always being evaluated. And we do make the right decisions. We're not what we were 100, 200, 300 years ago. And that's really what said classic Trek to me. So I have to agree with you on that level. I think the other thing that it showed us is that, we can work past our differences as the human race and come together to do amazing things. And that's the other thing that really said classic Trek to me. Whereas the movies were about, hey, let's go get this bad guy. This was about, hey, let's come together and go explore the galaxy. Mm-hmm. And that really was like coming home, that aspect.
I agree. I have to agree with that, as you like to say. It was interesting. I like how you pointed out about Q and whether or not we were going to see it. Recurring characters, yeah, they were practically non-existent in the original series. So for the idea, and when Q left at the end of the first episode, he said, "I'm not going to promise I'll never return again." It was like, oh, so this is going to be somebody that we're going to see again later if the show survives. Now, I didn't think that at the time if the show survives, but that's another discussion point I guess we can bring up. But yeah, I like your points, man. Very, very cool.
So let's talk about the actual Farpoint scripts, because we're at that point now. This is really two stories that don't fit together well. I mean, I understand that DC Fontana had written essentially the Farpoint section of the script, and Gene came in afterward and added the Q stuff around it, and it does not gel, not in my opinion.
It is such a disorganized episode. It's very hard to keep track of everything. And another thing that my wife Susan said as we were watching this, it'd be switching, jumping around all over the place. And she goes, "You know what the problem with this episode is they're trying to do too much in one episode, and it's very hard to follow and keep everything organized." And I think she's 100% correct.
In hindsight, I absolutely think she's correct. I think they probably should have broken this out into separate episodes, or given us more time to let some of these ideas bake in, Now, granted, that said, there is some great expositionary, character stuff here, right? So by the time we get to the end of the first couple of acts, we know who Picard is. We get the sense of who Riker is. He's the guy who's going to take a lot of phaser fire on away teams. We we understand Geordi on some level. We get a really good look at Data and what, his character's quest is. We learn a lot about these characters right off the bat. And I think that's the important part of DC Fontana's contribution to this episode, quite frankly.
I think it was hilarious that right off the bat, like 15 seconds after or maybe a minute after we meet Riker, he's already hitting on Crusher. in front of Wesley. I thought that was just hilarious. But I agree with you. There were a couple of aspects of character development that I really was uncomfortable with in Farpoint, though.
Interesting.
We got the Picard. We got the Riker. I was very uncomfortable with Tasha in this episode. I've got to say, I thought her scenes were very odd. And specifically the scene where she kind of loses her temper in front of Q and starts screaming at him before she turns into a giant popsicle. I just felt that was so weird that it kind of turned me off from the Yar character for a long time, to be honest with you.
Well, I think that's part of the problem with Yar in general. I mean, it's really not got a lot to do with the way Denise portrayed it, because she was, acting out the words and the direction they gave her. But there wasn't a whole lot of substance to Yar other than she came from, the rape planet.
Right.
I thought that they really did that character a disservice. And maybe there was one too many characters in the rotation on the bridge. I don't know. But I thought they could have made her a much stronger character given her position. Mm-hmm. She's a woman. She's the chief of security on board this state-of-the-art vessel. Picard obviously trusts her. So I thought that they could have done a lot better by that character to make her as strong as she should be.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I also think that, unfortunately, at the time, it just seemed that he was just standing there in makeup to hey, there's a Klingon on the ship. But I thought that Worf was very underutilized, especially in Encounter at Farpoint. Luckily, we saw him develop over the course of time. But you know what's funny? They brought together all of these characters and we're meeting all of this major cast, but sometimes the acting was not great. And at times I thought that the people that didn't have big roles did the best job. Cole Meany, for example. I mean, we see O'Brien in the very first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. And even though he doesn't do much, he was more comfortable to watch, I think, than some of the major characters on the first episode.
Yes. I thought of that as I was rewatching that scene, the other day. But I think that speaks a lot to just how really great Cole Meany is. Yes. He acts with such ease that I think he brings that to all of his characters. Yeah. But you take a look at somebody like LeVar Burton, who at this point, in Star Trek, he's the biggest name on this show. I mean, he is known all over the world for Roots. And the first thing they did was cover up his eyes.
Yes.
Those amazing eyes.
And can I tell you, Bill, sorry to interrupt you. When he first was on the show, I didn't know it was him for that very reason. I didn't recognize who it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is an actor who, has gained incredible notoriety for his portrayal of Kunta Kinte. And I was excited because, wow, they got LeVar Burton? Oh, my word. And then they really didn't give him a whole lot to do in that, especially in that first episode. I mean, it's really not till season 2 that Geordi really starts to get a task, right? And to lead. So, but, between him and Will Wheaton, arguably the biggest names in the cast at the time, nobody knew who Frakes was or Patrick Stewart. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know that Michael Dorn was the guy from Chips until years later.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
With all of the characters that we meet, of course, this is the first episode and everybody's, getting their footing and so forth. For me, and I'm going to ask you the question, the best performance in this episode from an acting perspective, to me, unquestionably, was John Delancey as Q. Who was it for you?
Wow, that's tough. This is going to be an unpopular opinion. I feel like we almost need an unpopular opinion sound drop. Almost kind of like the spoiler alert siren.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, where that says unpopular opinion.
I got an idea. Black Alert.
Well, no, it should say unpopular opinion. Unpopular opinion.
All right.
But I'm going to say Jonathan Frakes, because he inhabits Riker right off the bat, and you get the sense of who Riker is immediately. You don't necessarily get that with Picard. Mm-hmm. You know, you're still kind of learning who Picard is. You know that he's not a big fan of children. You know that he's been a captain for a while. But I think they wait to give us those nuggets about Picard. Whereas with Riker, off the bat, you get immediately the sense of who he is because they tell us, right? He's the guy who wouldn't let his captain beam down. He's the guy who takes the captain's security, you know, as more important than anything. You know, he's a dedicated guy. You know, when Geordi first comes up to him at Farpoint to report about the Enterprise, you know, the first thing he says, "Is this an official report?" And Geordi snaps to and says, "Right, sir." Yeah. So he's that guy. And I think that Frakes really set the tone for Riker amazingly well. Now, the best part is, you know, in later seasons, they get to ease off that a little bit and show some of Riker's warmth, which I think is all Frakes. So for me, it's probably Frakes number 1, Delancey 1A.
Nice. I like that. And I agree 100% with what you said. I love the scene in the ready room, although they really need to turn the lights on in the ready room and Encounter at Farpoint. When he's like, Picard's like, "Are you going to back off of that in relation to beaming the captain going on away missions?" And Frakes or Riker's like, "No, I'm not going to. That's my job." I thought that was a great scene and really cemented what this first officer was going to be about on the Enterprise.
You know, there's a lot that we could pick apart this episode for, and I don't necessarily want to do that. I would rather talk about the things that really spoke to us as Star Trek fans, because I think that's really the key to enjoying Encounter at Farpoint. So, you know, you mentioned that scene. What else about this episode, you know, is something that really speaks to your Star Trek fandom or that you really enjoyed?
I think one of the things, I don't know if it's so much Star Trek, but one of the things that I liked most about this, it's another Riker-esque scene, and that's when he beams onto the Enterprise for the first time, and Picard just kind of like waves him off. He's like, "Yeah, okay, blah 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 blah, welcome aboard." But then later he brings him into the ready room to talk about what's going on, and then he says, "I want you to connect the saucer section, and I want you to do it manually." It was like, and everybody, even Data's like, "Whoa, huh?" I thought that was great. I was like, okay, this captain's going to test him right off the bat. He's going to show who's in charge, and I thought it was a great scene. Now,
it absolutely is a great scene. Yeah.
I will say, and I was in a little bit of a disagreement with Susan about this, the scene of connecting the Enterprise back together, oh my God, it took forever. It's like, dude, just connect it and let's get to the next scene. But wanted to show that he could do it, and it was a big tense moment for him from Sue's perspective. But I did like the fact that Picard just right out of the gate said, "Here, do this. I'm going to challenge you."
It is kind of funny that Riker winds up looking at the back of Picard's head for his first several interactions. Even when he first walks into the ready room on the battle bridge, Picard is facing the camera.
Right.
You know, and it's like, okay, yeah, great. Nice to meet you too, buddy. I think one of the things I really appreciate about this episode is the fact that it really gives us the time to get a proper introduction to these characters, right? So that's not the kind of thing we got with the original series. I mean, they chose to air the Man Trap first. Not really a good introductory episode. You know, it wasn't for a couple weeks before they aired Where No Man Has Gone Before, and that kind of gives us an introduction, but certainly not in the level that Farpoint does with telling you who this crew is. So I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about this episode is that it took the time to make those introductions, because this was new. You know, this was not Kirk and Spock. And we had to sort of to learn about these people.
I like the fact that they were doing this. It goes back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, that they're setting a new course. This, you know, TOS was already established. They didn't have those introductions in the series, so to speak. With this one, you did, so you kind of felt that this was going to be going somewhere. But at the same time, I appreciate the fact that they did all of these introductions. I also kind of have to go back to what I said before about it seemed like there was a lot going on. This is a big crew. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of characters. It's certainly no Game of Thrones where you have to remember all of these weird names that you've never heard before. But at the same time, somebody coming in new might have been a little bit too much to chew on for that first episode with all of these different people going on, plus the fact that they're being put on trial and they've got this new station that they're checking out, and the Zoppler Dorn or whatever his name was.
Groppler Zorn.
Groppler Zorn.
Who was that guy who's about the voice of about 1 million animated characters at that time? First time I heard his voice, I'm like, wait a second. I've heard that guy's voice.
That's a riot.
What else do you really like about this episode?
Well, I have to be honest. We knew that this episode was of the podcast was coming up, and watching it again, I'm looking for the positive things. And I hate to bash it because it's not what we like to do. But at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from the fact that it's just not a great episode. And it's really hard to find specific things that I enjoyed. I loved Delancey's performance. I loved when he was changing into the different quote unquote costumes, like the World War II uniform. I thought that scene was great. I did not like the uniform with the soldiers that were sniffing a drug, I would assume. I didn't like that part, but his scenes were, as we've seen with everything that Delancey does, were strong. His character, even though so confusing because he's this omnipotent being and a godlike, like you said before, he carries those scenes. He carries the scenes when somebody like Patrick Stewart is there. He still carries the scene. Now that changes over the course of time, but he was brilliant in this. I really liked Delancey's performance as Q. It's funny, we say this all the time. Nobody else could have done it, but we never saw anybody else try to do it. But I got to think that nobody would have played Q better than Delancey.
I agree with that. Can you imagine if Delancey had been Riker? Just wouldn't have been the
gosh,
same.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have been the same.
Nope, not at all.
So, like you said, we don't want to bash this episode because, you're right. That's not what we do here. But what might we have liked to have seen done differently in this episode? What small change, what different development might you have liked to seen in the production of Encounter at Farpoint?
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. I think the production is the thing that I have the most problem. The post-production is what I have the most issues with, knowing what we expect with Star Trek nowadays. And of course, it's been 30 years since this aired. The scenes, it's so odd and unnerving, to be perfectly honest, when they're sitting on the bridge or in a ready room and their voices are echoing because there's no ambient engine noise that you can really hear. That drives me crazy watching this episode. And it's a small thing, but it's something that you become so used to when it is put into place. The echoing, the dark lighting in the ready room I mentioned before, that's another thing that really was like driving me crazy. Little things like that, but little things become big things. One of the things that I think drove me most crazy with this episode, because I understand it's a quote two-parter. It's a mini movie. It's the first Star Trek we've had in over 20 years. They wasted so much time in this episode cutting to every character just staring straight ahead, waiting for something to happen. And when you're doing it with 6 or 7 characters, that adds up to a lot of dead time in the episode, I think. What do you think about that?
I hadn't thought about that, but I can absolutely see what you're talking about. There's that first scene, where we see the opening credits, and then, we see the Enterprise come into frame, and then we come over the top of the hull, and then you see Picard in the darkness, and there's a couple of beats before he actually walks forward into the light. And I'm like going, okay, why is he just standing there in the dark? It's that kind of thing where, they could have just shown him looking out the window or taking one step into the light as if he had been walking toward the window all along. Some definite, editing choices that I'm not sure I would have made. So I can totally respect where you're coming from with that. Yeah. For me, I would have liked to have seen Encounter at Farpoint be a 3-part story. And I think that would have been kind of game changing for television at that time. Not like this wasn't already, but
right.
I think that it would have been a more effective way to tell these particular stories. So part 1, do the Q thing, have the trial, and then sort of present the beginnings of the whole Farpoint station story. And then part 2, do the Farpoint station story, or most of it, and then in part 3, you can have Q come back, and you can have a bigger discussion, and maybe there's some different conflict that comes in at the end, but you have more time to have better character moments and not necessarily have people staring into space at nothing. So I think that really could have said and done a lot with regard to the tone and the pace of the series. Quite honestly, I think it definitely would have established Next Gen as its own thing, and the producers wouldn't have had to worry about, are people just going to be waiting for Kirk and Spock? Because at this point, their course would have been firmly set.
Right. I don't think that's ever been done, a 3-part premiere. That's a very cool idea, man. Let's do that.
Okay. I like it.
Yeah. There's, like we've talked about it, there's so much going on in this that I think stretching it out into yet another episode is a very good idea. I like that, man. I like that a lot. Well,
thanks. So, Dan, lastly, where for you does Farpoint fall compared to all of the other pilot episodes? It's I feel like we've had an embarrassment of riches as far as Star Trek pilots, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Where does this one fall in the pantheon?
Well, I'm not going to lie, it's not high for me. Now, we've talked before about, what's the real pilot of TOS? And I'm going to go with Mantrap because it's the first one that was shown. I love Mantrap. It doesn't give, character background or anything like that, but it's a great episode. I love Mantrap. So a lot of people will put Mantrap as one of their worst. Especially now with Discovery. So now we have a lot, more to talk about. And Farpoint, from a standpoint of enjoyability and Star Trek, it's got to be near the bottom, if not the last one for me, man. I hate to say it, but it's low.
Yeah.
Which is so amazing to think of because Next Generation is such an amazing series. It's the majority of people's favorite series. Of course, Deep Space Nine is ours, but almost everybody I talk to, what's your favorite series? Oh, I grew up on TNG. TNG is my favorite. It's amazing that with a pilot that, looking back on it 30 years later, is or can be considered not awesome, that the series is so beloved. But for me, it's right down there near the bottom.
Yeah, it's not my favorite. I do think it has some good moments, but if I'm going to watch the other pilots, if I had to rank them, it absolutely would be down toward the bottom. Yeah. I think the other spinoffs rank far ahead of it, and even TOS, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, we're not huge Voyager fans, but Caretaker is infinitely better than Encounter at Farpoint, I think.
Oh, Caretaker's a fantastic pilot.
Yeah,
it's a great episode of Star Trek.
Yeah, it's really amazing to think that a pilot can fall on its feet, so to speak, like in my opinion, Farpoint does on a bunch of levels. And the series, it's as if that's just one episode. We got these other 100 plus, 160, 170 plus episodes that we're just going to kill it, except for some of the ones in season 7. But it's interesting to think of. And like Sue said, if this was the first episode of Next Generation that she watched, she wouldn't have watched anymore.
Yeah, it's amazing to think how far the series came after this. It was an okay start. If you look at it on its own and don't compare it to any of the other Star Treks, it's not a bad beginning for the series. Mm-hmm. I think that they learned a lot of lessons from this pilot, and in writing the other ones, I think they applied many of those lessons because the pilots kept progressively getting better and better. But if you look at this as a standalone, for the series, it's not a bad first start for getting Star Trek back off the ground on television again. And I think that's part of the joy of this episode. If you're looking for something to really appreciate in this episode, examine this Farpoint episode on its own and make the evaluation that way, because there's some okay Star Trek here. Honestly,
there is. Yeah. Don't think that I'm saying that it's an episode I hate and I would never watch it. It's certainly not Aquiel. I mean, I'd watch this 150,000 times to one version of Aquiel or Sub Rosa, but
Code of Honor.
There are some parts that are not great, without a doubt.
At the end of the day, it's not Code of Honor.
Exactly.
Well, Dan, that kind of concludes our look at Farpoint. It was kind of fun to watch it again. Yeah, there were some cringeworthy moments, but there's some moments that make you go, "Oh yeah," and I think that's really part of the fun of watching this episode again or rewatching it. It's one I may have to dig up again in a few more years. Maybe we get to TNG 35 and maybe look at it from a different angle, as the more nostalgic view. Perhaps that'd be fun.
I like that. One of the things also I wanted to point out very quickly before we wrap it up is this was also, for me, one of the things I loved about it, and it did get better as everything did with TNG. This was the first time we've had Star Trek with these amazing special effects. We were used to the 60s special effects, and now we're getting stuff that we had never seen before, and that was very cool to see back in the late 80s, mid 80s.
Yeah, the first time I saw that ILM was doing the effects on Next Gen, I was like, whoa, that's awesome. Because, they had done, the best effects for the movies at that time. And so it was very exciting. Dan, you know what else is really exciting, my man?
I think I know what you're going to talk about, but I'm going to let you, drop the bomb, buddy.
Well, I'm going to say 5-year mission. That's exciting. Every time it comes up on my iPod in the car, I get really excited. And I commute about an hour to work in traffic at times. And what better way to pass that time than to listen to one of their albums? Dan, they provide 5-year mission, that is, every last bit of music for the Trek Geeks podcast and for Discovering Trek. And we love these guys, don't we?
We do love these guys. And, we're talking about the first episode of The Next Generation today. You would think that I would have something to say about Encounter at Farpoint, wouldn't you? But I'm not going to do that, Bill. You know why?
No.
Because I've already done that one, so I had to think of something new. But 5-year mission, their music is amazing. We love it. And the pull for their music is very strong. We can't fight it, Bill. You know that. I know that. And as fans, we must feed that hunger that is 5-year mission music, don't you think? Our heart is flame. Our ears are flame. It is that private and mysterious ritual where we must listen to 5-year mission. And it is called the Pon Fark. We have to live with it, Bill.
My ears are on fire right now. You're not lying.
That could be a song lyric.
The Pon Fark.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that mean we have this feeling once every 7 years? And
our blood is burning.
If we don't do anything about it, we'll die?
I think some people are dying right now listening to this Farkism.
I'm a little concerned because I didn't prepare for that, and this, quite frankly, took a turn. You have issues. Dan, we want everyone to head on over to 5yearmission.net. Please check out all their music, download their albums, become as big of fans as we are, because we want these guys back at STLV as the house band in 2018. And you can help do something about that by tweeting Creation Entertainment, messaging Facebook Entertainment, writing to Facebook Entertainment, whatever you want to do. But please let them know you'd love to see 5-year mission back as the house band for STLV in 2018. Dan, we also want to remind people they can subscribe to this here independent Star Trek podcast on a number of devices and get it automatically delivered every Tuesday. And you can find out more at subscribe.trekgeeks.com. Get this podcast on your iPhone, your iPod, your Android phone, your Microsoft Zune. Dan can get on his Sony Walkman if he wants, I'm sure. Wow. But subscribe and enjoy. That's all we can say. Make that so. Dan, next week, it's a discussion we've known was coming for a long time, and it's gonna be a big time episode.
It's going to be a big time episode indeed, my friend. So next week, we talked about it earlier during news. We're going to take a look at the final episode of Star Trek Continues in a supersized episode of Trek Geeks. And joining us yet again to give us all the behind the scenes details will be the captain himself, Vic Mignogna. And Bill, this is going to be his 8th appearance on your independent Star Trek podcast. That is amazing stuff. It's To Boldly Go Part 2 next week on Trek Geeks.
Wow. 8 times.
8.
There is going to be a lot to talk about. and Vic wants to talk about it all. So I can't wait. It's going to be amazing and heartbreaking at the same time. Dan, for more great Star Trek discussion, we want everyone to head on over to the Tricorder Transmissions online at the tricordertransmissions.com. A brand new podcast over there called Politrex about politics through the lens of Star Trek, which we think everybody's going to enjoy. But they have so many other great shows guaranteed to please just about every Star Trek fan in the alpha and beta quadrants. Plus, for all the news on all the Star Treks, please visit our wonderful friends at TrekNews.net. For now, this has been episode 120 of the Trek Geeks podcast. We do hope you all live long and prosper.
Sir, it's wonderful. A feeling of great joy and coconut. Great joy and coconut for both of us.
No, I think that's just for you.
Okay. You know what my wife said when that line happened?
What's up?
Is there any reason why she had to say it twice?
It was twice as nice.
Aw.
Bing bong.
What's up? La, 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 la.
What was that?
I'm in a singing mood, you know?
I was almost Aaron Neville-ish.
Oh, God. Okay. See, now we're almost in the holiday season. We actually were listening to Christmas music yesterday when we were driving home. And I won't lie, I was doing a little Aaron Neville.
Of course you were. You can't help yourself.
Yes. You can do Aaron Neville with just about anything, really. You know, because I'm bad. You know it.
Wait, is that the Michael Jackson song Bad?
Yes. I just thought of the first song that came to my head, and that was it. So I had to try to figure out how to do it.
So wait, the first song that came to your head was Bad by Michael Jackson. Yeah. You have issues.
Well, we were going through stuff in the basement yesterday, packing up stuff, and I had a ton of CDs, and of course, all my MJ collection was there, and the one that was on top was that one, so it was in my mind.
Wait a second. Let's back up here for a second. You have a Michael Jackson collection?
Oh God, dude! Back in the '80s, oh yeah, I loved him when I was younger. Yep.
How have I not known this?
You didn't know that?
No.
Wow. Oh my God. Yeah, I had everything of his. Yep. Yes.
Wow. Uh-huh. I have no idea what to do with this information.
You should have seen me back in, oh God, when was it? 84, 85, when I had the Thriller jacket and at a Halloween party at the Nashua Country Club. I was Michael. Oh yeah. Glove, shoes, hat, jacket, hair, everything, sunglasses. It's pretty fun.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you get set on fire at any point? Because that would have been my wish.
No, I was not drinking Pepsi that night, so I was good.
Wow.
Yes. So I didn't know you knew that. Didn't know.
No, I had no idea. I'm
big fan. Big fan.
I'm stunned. I can't wait for Fark to find this out.
Well,
I feel like this reveals a side of you that we never imagined, and none of us imagined possible.
Oh, it's kind of hard. If on any given day, who's better, Jackson or Fark? It all depends on my mood, man.
Well, right now it's Fark because
it's Fark.
He's alive. Too soon? Too soon?
No, not too soon. What you drinking?
I'm drinking some Green Mountain Nantucket blend coffee. So I got up this morning and I was making my first cup and I screwed up.
Okay.
I meant to grab the Nantucket because I usually like to have that for my first cup. And then I have something flavored for my second cup. and I grabbed the flavored K-Cup by accident first, which was cinnamon sugar cookie.
Okay.
So I had that first. And so now I am having my Nantucket, which is kind of my go-to.
Okay. It's not Folgers, right?
No, it's Green Mountain, Nantucket.
Okay, because the best part of waking up is Folgers in your cup.
Can you imagine if Shatner had ever done a Folgers commercial? Like the Christmas one that makes my younger sister cry every single time, where Peter comes home for the holidays. It's like, Peter, my sister turns into just a blubbering pile of tears. Can you imagine Shatner in that scene? The guy comes home from college. He's got the knapsack slung over his back. He lets himself into the house. He's downstairs. He's making coffee. The lights come on, and Shatner walks in and goes, Peter, I'll take my coffee black.
That would have been great. Oh, my God.
Not as emotional.
No. That's good coffee flavor. We as I told you the other day, we were down in your area for a couple of days, and we went to Parker's Maple House.
Thanks for calling.
Well, we had things to discuss.
Thanks for calling.
Well, you were working.
Excuses. Yeah, one of us does.
So I got some Parker's Maple House K-Cups.
I didn't know they had those.
We didn't either. So I am sipping on a maple coconut right now, and I'm not lying.
I just threw up in my mouth.
I also got a maple bacon coffee K-Cup.
That sounds okay.
Yeah. Maple walnut.
I'm sensing a trend.
Sugar maple. Yeah, and maple.
So back to the Shatner thing for a second. They could have made Peter, his nephew, Peter Kirk. And it could have been Captain Kirk in the kitchen.
That would have been beautiful.
Peter, you're home from Starfleet Academy.
Is this Peter Kirk before the Gorgon?
Well, after. I mean, so he was too young to be at the Academy at that age, right? So,
true.
He would have been, older and looking more gawky and stuff, and he'd have come home. Go ahead.
Can I give you a slight spoiler about a certain, just one paragraph of the new autobiography of Jean-Luc Picard?
Considering you're giving that spoiler to everybody, okay, sure. Okay.
Peter Kirk is in it.
That's a good trick. Interesting.
But it's not a good captain. He's not a good captain. He's just like a captain of like a garbage scow or something like that. But he's in it.
So he holds the equivalent job that Dan Davidson would hold in Starfleet. In fact, no, they would have given you the job that all the EMHs that have been decommissioned were given in Voyager. Cleaning impulse manifolds or whatever it was. That
Why
would
be like this.
And they would have replaced all the EMH Mark 1s with you.
So there would have been thousands of me running around, basically.
No, there would have been one, and you just would have had work, for 1,000 years. I think we're all better off when there's only one of you.
Can we get started?
No, I'm not ready.
You're having fun. I can tell. Speaking of William Shatner, I got another thing to tell you.
Yeah.
Scrolling through Facebook or Twitter last night. Of course, there's the Rhode Island Convention this weekend.
Right.
That we're recording. Today is November 12th, 2017. And one of the pictures was of of a bunch of cast wrapping up their session on stage. And it was Brent and Michael Dorn and Marina and Frakes. And next to Frakes was the Captain William Shatner. So he was on the stage with the TNG panel. Yeah,
he's been hosting a lot of those TNG 30 reunion panels at other cons.
That's beautiful. It's the first time I'd actually seen a picture with all of them together.
Which I don't get why. He hasn't watched his own show, and he sure as hell hasn't watched theirs.
True, unless he gets paid for it.
Oh, I'm sure he's getting paid for it.
No, I mean paid for watching the show.
Oh, no. Oh, okay, yeah. That's the only instance I can see that happening.
And then our friend Sarah Hope from STLV had a great picture of all of that same cast, including Shatner, as a photo op. It's pretty good.
Interesting.
The backdrop looked like a cement wall, though, so I don't know.
It's Rhode Island. That's entirely possible.
Indeed.
That's the scenic part of Rhode Island. And before we get hate mail from Rhode Island, we're from New Hampshire and Maine, respectively. we know we're telling the truth.
That's true. Absolutely. Yeah, that's okay, though. That's fine.
All right, Jerk, you ready to do this?
I am. Encounter at Farpoint. Ah!